Good evening. Welcome to the Walker Cinema, everybody. My name is Pablo de Ocampo. I'm the director and curator of Moving Image here at the Walker. I'll begin tonight by acknowledging that the Walker Art Center sits on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary homeland of the Dakota. This site, which once was an expansive marshland, was very essential to not just the Dakota, but to many other indigenous nations who did at that time live and still currently live in our area today. As an uninvited guest in this area, these statements are something that I say out loud at the beginning of programs. You probably hear many people say them, but I say them myself as just sort of a reminder of where I am and what is the work that I'm trying to do here, trying to think both through my place here in the present, reconcile that with ideas and thoughts in the past, and project forward into sort of what that might mean about the futures that I want to live in and be around. We are here tonight for the second night of what is a 4-part program called Vibrations of a New People. Was anyone at the screening of Born in Flames last night? Bunch of people. Thank you for coming out 2 nights in a row. It's hard to go 2 things in a month, so come to 2 things in one weekend. I applaud you and I really appreciate you. We do a lot of different things here in the cinema if you've been here before, so you may know that we do different styles of programming, different types of films, many different types of things. If you see something and you don't like it, feel free to tell us, and also come back, because the other thing will be totally different. But I'm saying that to say that one of the things that we do sometimes here in this wonderful, beautiful cinema, in this great, larger institution of the Walker, is sometimes what we do in here is kind of in the dark, it's behind the doors, it's its own thing. Other times we like to kind of point at or resonate or kind of rub up against other things that are happening in the Walker. And so what we're doing with this program this weekend, it continues next week with 2 other screenings, is sort of pointing out to some other things that are happening at the Walker. As you have probably seen, because it is being blasted all over the city, we just opened a large exhibition of Keith Haring's work that are in the main galleries just kind of above us right now. That'll be on the view through the summer. And over the next 2 weeks, or the last couple of weeks, to catch an exhibition called The New Eagle Creek Saloon by Sadie Barnett. Both of those exhibitions really look at 2 different moments that have many ideas and thoughts in them, but central to both of them are some themes around queer underground histories and how we learn and think about those historical moments of the past. And so in this specific moment where these 2 exhibitions are overlapping, I invited curator Jon Davies, who's joining us from Montreal, to think through some of those ideas, because Jon is a curator who lives in Montreal, who, I just said that, who I've known and appreciated and admired Jon's work for many years. And one of the things that Jon has always expertly done is really consider different queer lineages and transmissions through history, and how those things resonate from one generation to another generation, how we learn from those past moments. So this is a series of 4 films that I'm going to let Jon speak a little bit more about what we're going to hear tonight. Jon's here. Glenn Belverio is out in the audience, and we'll join Jon for Q&A afterwards. We'll have moments to discuss with the audience as well. And I said enough. Over to Jon.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming back if you were here to see Lizzie Borden last night, which is a very special event. So we're very pleased to have Glenn Belverio here tonight, an independent film and video maker who lives and works in New York. And he began producing, co-hosting the popular Manhattan cable series, The Brenda and Glennda Show, in 1990, a talk show that took the art of drag out of the nightclubs and into the streets, mixing politics with humor, and became the post-queer talk show Glennda and Friends in 1993. And I first saw an episode of it in the early 2000s through the video art distributor V-Tape in Toronto. And I loved it, but had assumed that other episodes were lost or maybe inaccessible. And so it was very exciting when Video Databank in Chicago digitized and began distributing the work a few years ago. So we'll be back for Q&A with Glenn after the screening. And please come back next weekend on Friday and Saturday for the film Narcissistor Organ Player on Friday, and a curated shorts program called Transmission on Saturday. And thank you for coming. Please welcome Glenn Belverio.
Thank you for being here.
Did you want to talk a little bit about that last song that we just heard?
Yeah. So, has anyone seen this amazing film from 1980 called Times Square? Raise your hand if you've seen it. Not that many people. It's this film, and Tim Curry from the Rocky Horror Picture Show is in it, and he plays a DJ who has a station in Times Square, and it's this kind of punk rock teenage lesbian love story, and it's about this teenager who is the daughter of a Democratic politician who works for the mayor, and he's been assigned to clean up Times Square. And so this girl's, growing up in this upper middle class family, and the politician kind of uses stories about his daughter to promote his political agenda, which aren't true. And she rebels, and he puts her in a mental hospital. And in the mental hospital, she meets this punk rock, another teenage, but this one is a punk rock dyke who's been like living on the street. She's dressed all in leather. She's sitting in her bed with a boombox playing the Ramones. And the movie is really famous for its amazing soundtrack of punk and new wave. So they break out of the mental institute and they start a band called the Sleaze Sisters. And this is the song that Tim Curry has them, and they're on the run. Like the police are trying to find them, and the politician is trying to find his daughter. And they perform this song live on the radio station, and it's all about the girl, the daughter of the politician, rebelling against her father and saying, I now identify with all of these marginalized people that I've met on the streets of Times Square. And the movie's coming out in a 4K restoration soon, so maybe they'll play it here at the Walker.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'll just start with a similar question to what I asked of Lizzie Borden last night about what it's like to watch these episodes today in like our current moment.
It's
and
fun.
30 years old.
I love it. It doesn't feel like 30 years ago. Like, I still watch, the Mary Tyler Moore Show from from 1970, and to me it feels like yesterday. So, and I grew up watching those shows when I was 5 years old. So, I know this was 30 years ago, but it just it feels very immediate to me because I'm a child. I grew up like TV was my religion. And, there were obviously years where these tapes were languishing and they hadn't been digitized and I hadn't seen it and, seen them in many years. But I love it. I mean, yeah.
I mean, so many of the issues that come up are so present day, like in every one of the tapes.
Donald Trump.
Visceral, yeah. Yeah. Maybe for people who aren't aware, you could tell us a little bit about cable access and kind of how you were allowed to do this.
Well, so when I moved to New York in 1987, one of the first things I was going out to clubs. That's one of the first things I discovered, and I had a boyfriend, and we were subletting an apartment that had cable TV. And I grew up on a farm in the middle of the woods in northwestern New Jersey, so we had Happy Days and the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And then suddenly I turned on public access, and there were all these, downtown artists and drag queens and like people doing TV shows from their bathtubs. And then there was also leased access. So public access was free. If you could produce a show and convince the station to have it on, you would get a time slot. And then leased access, you had to pay to be on, and to support that, you would have lots of like phone sex commercials. And so you would turn on the TV at like 7 o'clock and there'd be porn on TV. Like, I didn't grow up being able to see porn on TV. And one of my favorite shows was called Midnight Blue. I actually wore my this is a Screw magazine. It was this guy, Al Goldstein. He was kind of like a Larry Flynt figure. Did anybody see The People versus Larry Flynt? He was the publisher of Hustler magazine. And Al Goldstein was kind of more like a punk version of him, and he started Screw in the 60s. And he had this show where he would show straight and gay porn, and he would have porn stars on, and it just felt, as a young queer person, just to see all kinds of sex on TV and people just talking about it in this very, like, this is what I do. And there was also a show called The Robin Bird Show, where she had strippers on. I see you nodding. Yeah, it's a great show. She would have strippers from Times Square come on and strip completely naked to music, and then she would interview them, and the interview was always about like how many porn movies they made that week, and it would be like 20 movies in 1 week. So obviously my show wasn't, didn't feature porn, but we talked about porn, and I was very involved with, I joined ACT UP in 1988, and there was a group called DIVA, which was Damned Interfering Video Activists. And they would film our demonstrations, and there was a big one at St. Patrick's Cathedral, which I was arrested at in 1989. And they would put that stuff on public access. And like there was a show called Paper Tiger that was very left-wing Politico, and it would show a lot of those videos. So basically, and during this time, I was also hanging out at this club called the Pyramid Club in the East Village on Avenue A, which was a very specific aesthetic of drag. And by the 80s, that idea of that kind of old school idea, which I love, that drag was like satirizing women or imitating women. By the 80s in the East Village, drag wasn't about satirizing women. Drag was about satirizing drag, and we were commenting on drag, like old school drag. So it had this kind of postmodern layer to it. So that inspired me to start doing drag, but we wanted to combine that campy, irreverent, the social commentary of the Pyramid Club with the politics of ACT UP and just queer issues that were going on at the time. So long story short, we met people who were videographers in ACT UP, and they helped us put the show together. And I took it to Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and you would have to kind of like negotiate with them to get a time slot. And we had 2 time slots. We had an 8 p.m. prime time slot, and then there was another one that was like 3 a.m. And I would always joke that we had more viewers at 3 a.m. because everyone was coming home from the clubs and they were all coked up and they couldn't sleep, so they would just turn on the TV and watch the Brenda and Glennda Show, because there were no distractions then. There was no internet, and network television was really, that was like the nadir of pop culture. Network TV, the early 90s, it was like really bad shows that nobody remembers.
So it created an opening for you.
Yes.
I'm really just struck by your kind of fearlessness as a performer and talking to people. You were quite young when you started the show, is that right? Do you think that was?
Yeah, I was, I guess, so I was like, I don't know, 23?
Okay.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, when you're young, you're kind of fearless, but it was also, I learned a lot from being an ACT UP and just being confrontational and just being angry and proud of being queer. So we were pretty fearless when we were doing the show. And also the drag kind of armors you, and it's also kind of disarming because people are kind of, this is way before RuPaul's Drag Race, so people were caught off guard seeing drag queens in broad daylight, and that was a big part of our strategy, was bringing drag out into the street and to the daylight, because usually you would have to go to a nightclub or a theater to see it at night. The only time you saw drag queens during the day back then was this festival called Wigstock that Lady Bunny organized, and that was something that came out of the Pyramid Club scene.
Wow. I was thinking of that Copy Machine Manifestos show at the Brooklyn Museum, and show of zines, a big historical survey of zines. And video was quite central to it, and I was kind of thinking that video in some ways is maybe more related to self-publishing than it is to cinema. And I'm just wondering if you could maybe talk about that scene and the way that the kind of queer, radical queer community was kind of held together by zines, by letters, by these kind of analog mediums like video. And just kind of talk about that context.
Well, so for sure, public access was kind of like a video version of a zine. And in fact, Vaginal Davis, who's one of the big famous person who came out of that scene, she had a zine called Fertile LaToya Jackson, but she also had videos that were about Fertile LaToya Jackson. So they were like video zines, and she was one of my. Actually, I was already doing my show when I met her in 1992. But that was a big part of zines. It was the correspondence, because again, it was before email, and so people would mail each other copies of their zines, or just you would get fan letters saying, "I love your zine." It was like a small community that kept growing, and like scenes came out of it, like the Riot Girl movement. So I was doing a queer zine called Pussy Grazer with my friend Emily, and it had kind of like a dyke flavor to it. And it was also what drew me to the queer zine scene was that it wasn't just about criticizing mainstream heterosexual culture, but we were also gadflies within the mainstream gay culture. So there was a lot of like very punk, mean things that, like hand grenades that we were throwing at, the respectable gay and lesbian organizations like GLAAD and Heritage of Pride, who organized the Pride Parade. I never felt comfortable just marching in the parade with a rainbow flag. I was so angry, I only felt comfortable marching with ACT UP. And that's really how queer started. I mean, people like David Sedaris thinks that queer academics like invented that term 5 years ago, but it was a term that we reclaimed that came from the street, and this was in the late 80s, and it was not popular in the mainstream gay community. They just thought, why do we want to be called that? We've fought for years to not be referred to by these slurs. So that was really the genesis of queer, and it was an identity of being angry. And now it's become this kind of kumbaya, it's this umbrella term, and then it's like queer theory. And for me, it's really lost its fangs, and a lot of its meaning. It's become kind of abstract.
I mean, I feel like originally queerness was so tied to the experience of being hated, and there was no kind of possibility of being in any kind of mainstream, and you didn't see yourself represented in the mainstream, so you didn't try or aspire to it. So I think that's something that's like changed so much, and it's, one of the, like, an impetus for this program is kind of reminding us of that history. I think I forget what year it was, but in San Francisco, there's one of the Pride parades, there was a kind of radical queer group that marched with a burnt out police car. Like, that was their float in the parade, and that was kind of marking like the visibility of that more radical movement in the city. Yeah, I was just thinking too of how people often didn't meet each other in person until they were at a zine conference or a queer conference or trans conference or something. And maybe we can talk a bit about Joan Jett Black now, who I'm familiar with through the scene in San Francisco, but came out through Chicago. And do you want to talk more about Joan?
Yeah, I actually met Joan at a queer fanzine convention in Los Angeles called Spew. It was the second one, Spew 2, that Steve Lafreniere had organized. And that's also where I met Vaginal Davis. And Bruce LaBruce and I shared a table, and everyone was trading zines. And Joan came over and told me that she was running for president. And I said, oh, when you come to New York, I want you to be a guest co-host on my show. And it was interesting that year, 1992, was a very historical year for third-party candidates because, I mean, obviously Joan's campaign was satirical, and she was the first drag queen to ever run for public office. And she actually got herself on some tickets in some states like Mississippi. But then there was also Ross Perot, who won 19% of the popular vote that year. And as I was watching this, and like every time someone said, I'm not voting, Joan would like jump on them, like vote for me. And there's this like kind of, I think it's almost like an irrational fear, like the third party candidates and you're throwing your vote away. And like, my friend Camille Paglia and like Susan Sarandon voted for Jill Stein, and people were coming after them with pitchforks and torches. And the reality, and especially the mathematics of Ross Perot, like it was mostly people who weren't going to vote anyway. And after they did all the math of that election, he really didn't damage either candidate's chances. But anyway, what's interesting about Joan Jett Black's campaign is, it was satirical, but she was also asserting how drag queens weren't just entertainers, but they could also be leaders in the gay community. And that we started, we were integral with the Stonewall riots and starting the modern gay revolution. So that's what I really liked about, she's really funny and she has lots of campy humor, but she was also asserting how drag queens can be leaders. And she started out, she was one of the original founders of Queer Nation in Chicago. There were like 5 people. And they had a meeting and they said, we think we should have a political candidate to run for mayor. So at first she was like, no, I'm a pothead. There's no way that I'm gonna be able to do this. And they were like, no, you have to. So she ran for mayor first. And it was kind of like when Jello Biafra from the punk band, the Dead Kennedys, he ran for mayor in San Francisco. And he actually got he got votes. And so after she ran for mayor, then it was the same year as the presidential election, so that's when she launched her presidential campaign. Yeah.
I mean, she really presents like a very exciting, imaginative, utopian vision. Like it's really, it feels like this kind of queer world making project. I want to send things out into the audience for questions. I just want to ask about the years when the episodes weren't available and kind of how the preservation and digitization and distribution came out through Chicago in recent years.
Well, so the format was U-matic tapes, 3/4-inch tapes. That's what was broadcast on public access TV, and those tapes were just languishing in like my closet and under my bed and my producer's office at NYU, and I didn't know how to deal with them. And also I kind of put Glennda behind me, and I was like working in fashion and I didn't care about gay liberation anymore. But every once in a while I would get this nagging like fear of like these tapes are going to degrade and they're going to be lost forever. But the idea of like paying to have like 40 tapes digitized was overwhelming to me. I just didn't know how to deal with it. So then in 2018, a curator reached out to me from England, Nottingham, and it was they did a show called Still I Rise, and it was about feminism and queer identities, and they programmed the video I made with Camille Paglia, Glennda and Camille Do Downtown, which was I had like 2 videos that were being represented by Lux in London. And long story short, people started seeing the work, and then Video Data Bank in Chicago reached out to me because the woman who was a director there, she had organized my retrospective at the ICA in London in 1996. And so she said, there's a lot of interest in this work right now. So in 2019, they spent that year digitizing all the tapes, and they did an incredible job. In fact, Glennda and Bruce do Times Square. I think this is the first time it's ever been shown on a big screen. And they did a digital restoration of it for this screening. They had to digitize it twice and then combine the files because it was like dark and the sound wasn't good. So they're incredible, and I'm very grateful to them to bring these histories forward.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So if you'd like to raise your hand, and then please wait for a microphone to be brought to you so we can all hear you if you have a question.
Hi there, my name's Jason. I'm just curious what a show like yours would look like today in the world of bullying and transphobia.
Well, there's definitely a lot to talk about. But there's also, I always think about like what would it be like to produce a show like this now, and there's such a glut of media now, like because of social media and TikTok. There's so much competition and shorter attention spans, but that's not a reason not to do it. So what would it look like? I think similar to this, and I think going back out onto the street. I'm not supposed to talk about this, but I am working on a film. Someone's making a documentary about my archives, but we are thinking about bringing Glennda back. And what would that look like? That's like the big question for the treatment that we're writing. And my idea is to not do something safe in like New York, but to go to like a purple state or a red state and talk to people on the street about these issues instead of being in an echo chamber of people that agree with these views. It could be a little scary, because there's people with guns out there. But it's something I've been thinking about. So stay tuned. Yeah.
Any other questions? It's a lot of stairs.
Yeah, hi there. My name's Brian. First of all, I really want to thank you for all this. I think it's a really great compilation. And I was really heavily influenced I read Camille Paglia's Vamps and Tramps, and I read the transcript of Glennda and Camille Do Downtown, and I absolutely loved it. And I was really happy to see on YouTube just a couple of years ago the video for that. So I guess I have two questions. First of all, how did you connect with Camille Paglia in the first place? And secondly, are there any other videos of this show on YouTube?
So I was very involved in ACT UP from about 1988 until early 1992. And by early 1992, a lot of people would show up at the meetings with like left-wing agendas that weren't related to fighting the AIDS crisis. And not even left-wing, just kind of like, so I'll give you an example. So they would get on the agenda, and one of the groups that got on was this group called WAC, the Women's Action Coalition. And they were basically like women artists in Soho, like Laurie Anderson and Barbara Kruger. And, their mission was that not enough women were being shown in galleries. And I thought, okay, fine, but like, we're here to save people's lives, to fight the AIDS crisis, not save your art career. So this woman stood up and she's like, we're organizing a demonstration at a bookstore against this anti-feminist writer, Camille Paglia. And, her book is like the Mein Kampf of feminism. And I was like, is this where we're at now? Like, the left were banning books. And I had heard about Camille, and I know she was like in ACT UP, like, oh, you shouldn't be reading Camille Paglia. But these women were just so annoying to me that I started reading Camille, and my roommate, Emily, who we were doing Pussy Grazer together, the fanzine, we started taping because Camille was all over TV. She was on Phil Donahue and Dick Cavett. Like, you couldn't turn the TV on without seeing Camille being interviewed because she was funny, but she was saying things, she was fearless, and she was saying things that no one else was saying. So we would tape them on my VCR and watch them and laugh. And so she came to New York to do, when Sex, Art, and American Culture came out, that was her first essay collection. And I went, it was at the 92nd Street Y, and I wasn't in drag, I was in, as a boy. And I went up to get my book signed, and I said, oh my God, your essay about Elizabeth Taylor, she's my favorite actress, and I love the way you wrote about her. And she was like, amazing, and writing like Butterfield Day to Dream Vision in the book, and when she was signing it. And I said, and I also do this show on public access, that's about drag and drag queen activism. And she's like, well, I'm a drag queen feminist. You know, drag queens are the ruler of the universe. So long story short, she got a hold of my phone number and we started talking. And then she really wanted to show that she wasn't this ivory towered, you know, feminist academic who just wrote books and taught classes. Like, she wanted to get out on the street and do like this, you know, it's public access. It's like doing an underground movie, you know, and she wanted to really show that she was like a street tough feminist. And that's how the video came together. And we're still, we email every day. We're still very close. And we did a sequel to it called Glennda and Camille Do Fashion Avenue, where we talk about how much we love fur and, you know, skinny models. And so what you saw on YouTube is the 15-minute 16mm transfer, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 1994. And it's because in those days, you couldn't be shown at Sundance unless the format had to be actually film. Right. Which it's like today, nobody even like understands that. Everything's like, you know, digital, you know, file. But it had to be on a reel. So I had to like raise money to have it transferred. And so my producer, Stephen Michaels, put that on YouTube. And I'm glad it's there, but I'm really into preserving, and I love that you're all here because I'm really into preserving the theatrical experience and having people come to theaters. I don't want people to just be able to stream every episode of my show. I want people to come to a screening so that we could talk about the work. I don't want to be sitting wondering what all these streaming people are thinking about my work. I want to know, you know. So, and I'm trying to keep it on this kind of like art world level of having it play, and I hope that doesn't sound elitist, but I just think that people want everything to be online and everything to be streamable, and I just don't think it should be. Yeah.
I was thinking it's like it was kind of made with and for a subcultural audience, but then it was also showing on TV when anyone could watch it. So like the you know, broad public, like the bigger audience was always there as well. So it's actually not that big a transition to be kind of touring it now and showing it outside of that context. Could you maybe talk a little bit about the death of Times Square and 42nd Street, because you lived through that in New York, the Disneyfication under Giuliani?
Yeah, I hate it. I mean, I think one of my early awakenings as a gay man was in the late 70s. My father and my uncle would go to this car show that was at the. There was this really horrible, ugly, brutalist building called the Coliseum in Columbus Circle, and they would have like a car show. And we would drive into the city. This is when I was living in New Jersey, and they always made sure that we would walk across the entire 42nd Street because they wanted to look into the porn theaters. And of course, there was a lot of gay porn theaters, and just seeing like just the sleaze of like these, you know, men with their hairy chests, and like for like a 10-year-old, like by then I knew that I was gay. It was really exciting, and just like ever since then I've just thought that sleaze is just so important. And going back to the whack women, I really feel the beginning of the end was, I like Jenny Holzer, I like some of her work, but she did this project which was the Marquise, it was when the porn films were starting to get pushed out of Times Square. And she did this project where she had her aphorisms on the Marquise, like, men won't protect you. And I felt like that was just the beginning of this like bourgeois kind of scold culture, like porn is bad and sex work is bad. And that led, she kind of trailblazed like the Disneyfication of Times Square. And I just think it's terrible. Everything's online now. If you want to watch porn, it's all online. But the experience of going into these theaters, and you would meet people in these theaters. So I hate it that it's gone. But what can you do? That's just what happens.
Well, I feel a big part of queer culture, queer critique is complicating the divide between public and private when it comes to sex. And so to have just everything retreat to the private sphere, it just, it's a very limited view of like the power of sex. And so to, be able to look at these images like in a collective, like social space is just, it feels like even more transgressive now, like in the moment that we're in. Do you have any more questions? We have time for, yep.
I mean, hi Joe. I've been thinking about how to formulate this, but the sex work is what has been on my mind sometimes. Like considering today's environment with all the digital space and talking about porn being online and particularly with COVID and people being at home a lot. Do you see yourself talking differently today than say what we saw in the second episode in relation to necessity versus victimization versus the purpose of the environment?
Well, I mean, again, like the physical world of porn and like stripper bars and sex work has vanished. So, I don't talk about it anymore because, I'll watch porn online, but that's like, everybody does that. But I really miss being able to go, like I had all these girlfriends who were strippers at this place called Billy's Topless. And I just miss being able to go to those places. But today it's like, I'm not doing this show anymore. I'm not writing about sex work, so I don't talk about it. I just lament the demise of the physical realms of all of these things. Yeah.
I don't have a question. I just want to point out that your teleprompter won't say pussy or porn. Pussy porn, pussy porn, pussy porn, pussy porn.
Thank you for that intervention.
I hope someone documented that. There's some, yeah.
I just wanted
Did it
to-
happen when you said pussy porn?
You won't say dick either.
Penis. Oh, the patriarchy wins again. Pussy porn. Wow. That's unbelievable. I was in the galleries today looking at the Keith Haring show, and there were 5-year-olds looking at Keith's, penis work, and it was no big deal, but I guess,
Yeah, who knows who made this technology?
we're gonna talk about Drag Queen Story Hour. So today was the first time I've been to Drag Queen Storybook Hour. It was in this room this morning. People are always asking drag queens, what do you think of Drag Queen Storybook Hour? And I always say, I've never been invited to one. I've never been to one. I'm really not sure if I think it's lame, if it's like the Disneyfication of drag, or is it like, are kids too young to be like thinking about queer when they're 4 or 5 years old? So I came in here with an open mind this morning, and there was a drag queen in a ball gown, and then there was a drag king with like a glitter beard, and then there was a lesbian Muslim, and they were sort of, and it wasn't just Drag Queen Storybook Hour. They were doing like a show. It was like an off Broadway show, and it was like a high school pageant, and so they were like introducing the show. It was very kind of this like romper room vibe, and there was this 5-year-old girl sitting right there, and she just blurted out, "Are you gonna sing some songs?" And they're like, "Yeah, we're gonna sing some." And she goes, can I come on stage and sing it with you? And that's when I realized the kids that were here today, they don't care. They weren't here to like explain queer to me or what is a drag queen. They want to get into show business. And I looked across the room and I just saw this sea of Eve Harringtons and Lucy Ricardos like plotting, like how could they get on stage, and like this was their big in. So that's what I think that drag queen storybook hour is about. Yeah.
It's important to nurture that theatricality from a young age.
Totally.
I think we had one last question.
Back there. Oh.
I just wanted to know what happened to Brenda.
Oh boy. Can you guys hear me? Because I think my mic is going in and out.
I think you're good.
You can hear me, good. So, I don't know if you noticed, but like in the Taj Mahal show, like, and I just want to talk about what it was like to organize something like that in 1991 before cell phones. And like today, like you get like these updates every millisecond of like you're meeting someone for dinner and you know exactly like, I'm 5 minutes away, or I'm stuck on the subway because a mentally ill person like pulled the brake. And but then in those days it was like, okay, we're gonna go to Trump's Taj Mahal. You're all gonna be in drag at 8 a.m. and we're gonna meet on a street corner, and it was winter, and you just had to trust that people would show up because there was no way of contacting them. And Brenda was always not completely comfortable in her, his real name was Duncan, not comfortable in the role of Brenda. So I remember that morning she was in a really bad mood because she had brought home a bad trick from the like tunnel bar the night before. And like I called her and she's like, oh God, do we got to do this today? I'm like, yeah, no, we're doing it. Like people are waiting for us on the corner and like we have our bus tickets. So I had to go over there and like drag her out of bed and like pour coffee down her throat and put the makeup brush in front of her. And but that said, she was also, we started the show together and she had a lot of brilliant contributions. And then by 1990, she decided that she was going to leave New York, and she had fallen off the wagon. And New York was too much for her, and she moved to the South to pursue a career in landscape architecture. And this is going to be in YouTube, and now she's going to hear all these things I said about her. But I love her, and I've been trying to get him involved in the movie. And at first he was interested, but then changed his mind. And a lot of queer there was one day where we were making a film with this German filmmaker named Michael Brintrup, and do you know his work? Oh, and he was shooting us on the West Side Pier, and it was during the day, and we were coming back to, and we were living on 3rd Street between B and C. I still live in that apartment, and these teenagers who lived across the street tried to bash us, and like we ran in the building, we ran upstairs. And I was like the active person, like on the phone with the police or like reporting. And I remember Duncan went into the bathroom and just started shaving his head. Like that was his way of dealing with it. And it was like this instant PTSD. And so things kind of changed after that incident. Like we would do shows and she would show up, but then there were like for the Joan Jett Black video, I don't think she really had the flu. She called in sick that day, and I think she just didn't feel comfortable being, and it was a big thing to like be in drag before it was, before there was like a real out gay culture and before RuPaul's Drag Race to be on the streets. So
in broad daylight.
In broad daylight. I mean, I loved it. It's just, but so that's Duncan's story. But we did start the show together. And she'll always be a legend. Yeah.
Do we have any last question? Oh, okay, great. We can also continue the conversation outside in the lobby.
Hi, I'm Jessie, and I guess one thing that came to mind that was really stuck out to me in all three movies in different ways was like just a lot of the conversations people were having around like class issues and political divides between the Republicans and Democrats, and about like different queer subcultures interacting with each other. It's like a lot of the same conversations that people are still having. And I was kind of like curious, like where your thoughts are on like, should people be focusing on ways that we can progress? Is this like a natural product of people just like commenting on the culture, commenting on like the ways in which, I don't know, it's like a different like era, but a lot of the like core things about America are still the same as they've always been. I don't know, I'd just be curious like what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think, it comes up again and again, like not much has changed. Like we're still fighting for abortion rights, and there are trans people being beaten in the streets and murdered, and there's still, even though there's this illusion that that gay people have assimilated into the general culture, but it depends on where you live in America, and I think it's just that America is a conservative country, and there's always going to be the status quo of the heterosexual nuclear family, and it's not going to change. And so I think we're always going to be, I know it sounds pessimistic, but I think we're always going to be fighting for these issues, just because of the way, and late stage capitalism is really like, it's become accelerated, this normative culture. And even a lot of queer people sort of get dragged into this like monetizing things on TikTok, and like RuPaul's Drag Race is a perfect example. It's this neoliberal idea of drag. I'm going to win this contest. I'm going to win this money. I'm going to become famous. And it's not transgressive. RuPaul was transgressive when she started out in the 80s. I knew her then. But it's, I think that RuPaul's Drag Race is a really big distraction from fighting for these issues, because it's created this illusion that everybody accepts drag now. It's people who are accepting it are people who like drag, but they're still the very like hardcore conservative areas of this country. So I think you were going to ask me about like, how can young people can they still make work that's transgressive? And I think like TikTok and RuPaul has like been a deterrent to that, but I think that there's this new movement like with zines. Like I'm hearing that young people want something that has more permanence than a TikTok video that you forget about 5 seconds after you watched it. So I think that young people are going to start picking up video cameras and Super 8 cameras and start. I mean, that's my hope. It can't just be me bringing the show back. I'm almost 60. Like cut me a break. I think now it's time for like young people to step up and do work that's not about monetizing it, and not about I'm going to be famous or I'm going to hit the jackpot doing this. But I think there's a lot of young people that are thinking that way,
Yeah, I think that's the key, is just like thinking outside of a market or fame kind of reward system, and just like reorganizing ourselves. Thank you so much. So fabulous to have you here. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.